Grand Admiral Thrawn. But how is that possible? He disappeared years ago.
I have reason to believe he is alive. And that his allies are working on a way to find him.
You are certain of this?
If I could get approval to send a task force to the Denab system, I could find out.
General, be honest. Isn't this just another attempt to gain New Republic resources to aid in what has ultimately been your personal quest to find Ezra Bridger?
Ezra vanished while fighting Thrawn.
And that you conveniently use a threat of Thrawn's return to acquire those resources that could be put to a more practical purpose, helping the people of our fledgling republic.
Were you ever in the war, Senator?
No.
Just sat back and waited to see who came out on top?
Greetings once again, Bucketheads. Mavar Tigar. Welcome to our 214th practically perfectly per-gilling episode of Mandovision. Nargai Tom, and thank you so much for checking out this small independent Star Wars podcast. We are so glad that you are here. Remember to find us on social media. Reach out to the show. We're at Mando_Vision on Twitter and Instagram. You can email the show at mandovisiontom@gmail.com. Make sure you're liking, subscribing, following, and sharing the show with all the Mandalorians in your cohorts. Well, how is everyone doing? Welcome back. It is a Wednesday, the day after the Ahsoka episodes have dropped on Tuesday night. I personally am really digging this new schedule for Disney Plus's release dates. For specifically, they're doing this for Ahsoka. I don't think they're doing this for any other series just yet, but I have found this to be insanely beneficial because I've been able to watch. Last night I was able to watch the episode twice before I got tired and had to go to sleepies. But what an episode it was, packed full of more great stuff, just wonderful homages to the roots of Star Wars, a wonderful expansion of the story that we got a taste of in last week's two-part series premiere. There's just a lot to unpack in this episode, and I have comprehensive notes to go through for it, for better or for worse. I think for the better, because I think with last week's two-part episode, there was just too much, and I think there'll be some things I have to go back to that I didn't cover deeply enough from that two-part episode. But this time around, we're gonna hit all the big keys because there's quite a bit. There's just I think this is a wonderfully written episode because there's so much. So many layers to like some of the relationships in this, and then to the Star Wars galaxy as a whole. There are more, just little lines of dialogue that I think just add so much to what we know is happening in this period of the Star Wars galaxy. I'm keep saying that word over and over again, but this part of the timeline, it's important for us to sort of see a lot of the things that are going on, not just visually, but get that deeper understanding of what exactly is happening here. And we're going to talk about it. That scene, that section of dialogue that we opened the show with, in particular, I thought that sequence had just a lot of really interesting bits of dialogue and exposition, that really sort of, well, we'll talk about it when we get to that part of the show. But, oh boy, I really enjoyed this episode. If I had one knock on the episode itself, is that just not enough Balin Skoll. You don't even see Balin until the very end. And as you may remember from last week's episode, this is a character that I am very, very fascinated with. We'll have to have a chance to talk about Maruk more, because there's been a lot of interesting things with that character as far as the internet goes, and the speculation of who's behind that mask. And I suppose it merits talking about a little bit about, even though speculation is not my forte necessarily, but there's been a lot of chatter, and I would like to address some of it on the podcast here. So let's go ahead, we'll get into our particulars for the episode itself, and then we'll dive right into all the juicy aspects of this episode of Ahsoka. So, that being said, this is Ahsoka, episode 3 of season 1, hopefully of many more seasons, but I guess that's TBD, right? Original air date is August 30th, 2023. The episode's title, Time to Fly. Directed by Steph Green once again, written by Dave Filoni. Our plot for this week: Hera tangles with New Republic politics, while Ahsoka and Sabine Wren voyage to a distant planet. Our primary cast this week: Rosario Dawson, Natasha Liu Bordizzo, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Ray Stevenson, Ivana Sakno, Diana Lee Inosanto, and David Tennant. So that's our cast for this week. We got our plot out of the way. So I think it's time that we go ahead and dive into the episode. So you know what that means, Buckethead Nation. It's time. Strap on your buckets. Let's go.
Anger and frustration are quick to give power. But they also unbalance you. Let's go again.
And so that's where our episode opens this week. We're in hyperspace with Ahsoka, with Sabine Wren, with Huang, and we see Sabine working on her lightsaber skills. But we see her not with a lightsaber in hand, but with wooden bokans, like we see in samurai pictures. So this opening sequence, what I really love about it is the outright homage to samurais, right? To the influences of to the influences that George Lucas had for creating the Jedi Knights in particular. What we see is Huang with forearms and sort of these lightsaber-esque devices in his hands. And what he's doing is, as Sabine attacks, he's checking the cuts that she's making with her saber, learning her technique and how she strikes and the efficiency with which she attacks. And it's a really cool thing to sort of see how he analyzes her attack patterns and the way he sort of evaluates her based off of them. I thought it was a really cool sequence, but it's a technique that's from samurai culture, but put it into a Star Wars spin. So again, something very, very, very neat. And I really did. I love seeing that homage. This is not an outright a Kurosawa homage, more of a general, more broad-based to a Japanese cinema, but also to the heritage of the samurai. So a very cool element to open the show with. And then Ahsoka steps in and begins to do the training herself, and she does so by doing something that we have also seen in Star Wars, which is, giving your student a helmet with a blast shield down so that they can't see, so that they learn to trust their other senses and the Force as well. In Sabine's case, it's a little bit different because I think Ahsoka is aware, the audience is aware that Sabine, not the most attuned to the Force. So for her, it will be about using those other senses and trying to sort of feel the Force in a way that she's not accustomed to. Another element of this scene that's very interesting is that there's a reference to Zatachi, right? And at first I thought Zatachi might have been a form of lightsaber combat that I was unfamiliar with. I went through all the forms and I was like, that's not one of them. And so I had to do a little bit more checking on that. And this is a piece of Japanese cinema that I was unfamiliar with. But Zatachi is a series of films based off a series of books from Japan about a blind swordsman. And so I feel like I should have known that because I think they've done something similar in the Usagi Yojimbo comics, and I feel like I just have missed it. My brain cells just weren't firing on that. So the Zartachi is a reference to more Japanese cinema that influenced George Lucas heavily as a young person when he was, getting all the ideas and elements in his mind for creating of Star Wars. And again, I think that's just a really, really neat touch. So again, at first I thought Zartachi was a new form of Jedi lightsaber technique that I was unfamiliar with, but no, not so much. Homage, a very direct homage, a reference even to more Japanese cinema that influences George Lucas, which again I think is very, very cool. And through that sequence, again, I think it's a well-directed sequence. It puts a new spin on something that we've seen in Star Wars before. Again, that helmet with the blast shield down, but it's directed insanely well by Steph Green. It has a whole different feel to it than what we've seen in the past with Luke and in the training droid, right, in the training probe, and again, just thought it was visually impressive, very well handled, very well executed. That stoicism of Ahsoka Tano as sort of like the master, gauging their student, gauging their apprentice. I think it's all really well done, and with Huang in the background, sort of watching and seeing these things, those kind of piercing yellow eyes that he has, I think are an interesting background device for the shots to revolve around. So very, very neat stuff in those moments. I really did dig that entire sequence. And since we did mention the helmet with the blast shield, obviously we're making a reference back to Star Wars Episode 4. One of the things I didn't talk about in the premiere of last week was on Lothal when Shin Hati has her probe droid out tracking down Sabine Wren. And it's a very direct homage to Episode 1 of Phantom Menace. And why I didn't talk about it then is because it's something that I was first, when they first brought the helmet with the blast shield down, I wouldn't say outwardly cringed, but Star Wars has gotten into like a little bit of a habit where it's become self-referential. And when I saw that Episode 1, I was like, okay, that's cute, but I don't know how much I like it. Is this series just going to have more of those kind of moments? And when the helmet with the blast shield appeared, I sort of had that same thought. But again, the scene was executed differently. I thought it was executed very, very well. And so I was like, well, maybe I'll acknowledge the fact that I skipped over the Episode 1 reference because it just sort of was there. I saw what they did. I just wasn't super impressed by it. This time around, Star Wars, yes, they did reference something, but they tied it to something larger. And the scene was executed in a very different fashion than what we've seen in the past. So I did really, really like the sequence. After this, we cut to that scene where we used to open the series, right? Or this episode of the show, excuse me, I should say. Where we see the New Republic Defense Fleet in action. We see a bunch of A-Wings rocketing through the sky. And I love the A-Wings. I'm a huge fan of the A-Wings from the old X-Wing space combat simulator game that was on the computers back in the 90s. Love the A-Wing. Super fast ship, super versatile. I find them to be vastly underrated in the Star Wars pantheon of starships. But we catch it with Harrison Dula. She's getting ready to meet with a senatorial committee to get approval to send a task force to Denab and see what Morgan Elsbeth is up to. So she's delivering this great report. And the big takeaway from this scene, from the opening of this, I forget the senator's exact name, but it's the female senator in the group just to the right of Mon Mothma. And boy, do these senators just sound so foolish and naive when they're talking about the imperial, the former Imperials, the reformed Imperials that now occupy every level of government in the New Republic. How do you say those words and think that it sounds like a great idea, like some kind of crowning achievement? Like, oh yeah, they're all totally reformed. This can't possibly be a bad thing in the long run. They just sound so naive and stupid and blind and full of themselves that, you sort of wonder, why did it take the First Order so long to take these fools down? It's just astonishing the level of naivete that these senators seem to have. And then, of course, that key moment that we highlighted in the opening of our podcast, where Harrison Dula is engaged in sort of a verbal sparring with Senator Ziono, a name you may remember if you've watched more Star Wars animated stuff. If you watch Star Wars Resistance, because Senator Ziono, the father of Kaz Ziono, who we know from that series. So now we tie in some Resistance stuff as well, kind of setting some things up there. So I love this whole sequence. I think it's wonderful. I love seeing Genevieve O'Reilly, of course, back as Mon Mothma. And I love that she's getting to play Mon Mothma at these different periods of not just her career, but her life. And seeing her at this phase, in sort of like a victorious mode as the Chancellor of the New Republic versus what we saw with her last time in Andor, struggling with balancing family matters and trying to get this fledgling rebellion off the ground. There's just a lot of versatility with that character right now, and so we're seeing some very interesting things from Mon Mothma and Genevieve O'Reilly in particular. So I think it's got to be a pretty fun character for her to play, who's played her at many different junctures of the Star Wars timeline. So that's I would think that's a pretty fun opportunity for her to do. But what do I know? Maybe she hates it. We'll have to get her an interview with her and see how that plans out. But yeah, I love the sequence. And then after this, again, I think we all know what's going to happen. It seems like Mon Mothma would like to engage in Hera in this task force, sending them to Denab to see what's going on. I think Mon Mothma may be the only member of this senatorial committee who seems to understand the weight of the Imperial Remnant, the threat that the Imperial Remnant still poses, and specifically the threat that the return of Grand Admiral Thrawn would pose to a very fragile New Republic. These other senators, again, delusional, as Hera asks directly to Senator Ziono, were you in the war? And the answer is no. So they don't understand. They don't have the experience with the Imperials that Mon Mothma, that Hera Syndulla have specifically, and know the treachery, the lengths to which the Empire will go to not fall into the shadows of history. So, again, it's a powerful sequence, but I think we all know that they're not going to give Hera the authorization that she needs. So she leaves the meeting room. I think she's hopeful, but real at the same time that it probably ain't going to happen. And this is our live-action introduction to Jacen Syndulla, coming around the corner with his flowing green hair. Again, the son of Hera Syndulla, the son of Kanan Jarrus, who you may remember perishes in Rebels, directly referencing the family members that she's lost to Thrawn and the Empire when she's getting mad at the senators. And it's cool to see. It's cool to see the kid. He makes reference to wanting to be a Jedi, like his father before him. Though how much Hera's told Jacen about Kanan, I guess, is sort of an unknown factor at this point. But Jacen seems very excited that Sabine is trained to be a Jedi. And I love the relationship between Jacen and Chopper. I think that's really cool. If they get a chance to explore that a little bit more, I'd love to see it. But a neat sequence. And then we're going to cut back to Ahsoka and Sabine having an interesting little chat. And I want to play one little stretch of dialogue that I think is very important, because as we sort of talked about last week, Sabine's ability to use the Force has been something that we have questioned on the podcast, that many other people have questioned on their podcasts, on the internet at large. And so Ahsoka is going to take a little time to sort of talk about that. And then I'm also going to play the bit that's after this, where Ahsoka and Huang are having a conversation on the bridge. But let's play this bit between Ahsoka and Sabine first. And just take notice. It's interesting stuff. Again, a lot of things packed into this episode. So here you go.
The Force resides in all living things, even you.
If that's true, then why doesn't everyone use it?
Talent is a factor. But training and focus are what truly defines someone's success. Not everyone can handle the type of discipline it takes to master the ways of the Force. Start small.
So there we go. We're starting to explore this a little bit differently, and I'm curious. I think some fans will push back against this bit of information. I think some fans will embrace this bit of information. Whether you look at it as expanding our idea of what it means to be a Force user, or if it's conflicting with what we think we know to being a Force user. I guess that's up to each individual person. I'm willing to wait and see where they take this, how far they're willing to go with it. But I'm going to juxtapose it against the scene on the bridge between Ahsoka and Huang here in just a moment. So it's a lot of interesting back and forth between the two on just what Sabine's abilities and potential can be as far as being a wielder of the Force. The bit coming up with Huang I think is very, very interesting. We'll talk about it after we play it. So I guess what that means is I'm just going to go ahead and cue it up for you guys, and we'll take a listen, all right?
So, what do you think of our progress?
She's frustrated. Still a challenge for her.
You both knew this wouldn't be easy.
Well, what you said didn't help.
I only spoke the truth. The Jedi Order would not have accepted her. She is not an acceptable candidate.
By their standards.
Standards which were proven over a millennia.
And failed.
You realize, historically, there have been very few Mandalorians who ever became a Jedi.
I don't need Sabine to be a Jedi. I need her to be herself.
Well, I suppose you do come from a long line of non-traditional Jedi. In that way, she fits right in.
So I love that bit. A long line of non-traditional Jedi. I think it's very cool. I really enjoyed Yang's sarcastic tone throughout the episode, sort of like the little snarky jabs that he makes at people, the shots he takes. I really have enjoyed David Tennant's voice work in this series. He gets to be a bit more, again, a little bit more like British snarky than he did on Star Wars: The Clone Wars his first time around playing Huang. So that's a very neat little twist. One thing I want to point out here. I want to also make reference. I thought about talking about this last week too, but can we give Ahsoka's ship a name for the love of God? Because T61974 is not like the easiest thing that rolls off the tongue. So it'd really be cool if her ship had a name. That'd be very more Star Wars fun. If we got a name, just calling it like the T6. That's boring. Who cares? Give us a name. Don't maybe keep referencing back on the T6. Like, oh my gosh, I don't like that at all. So I'd appreciate a little bit more help on that. So what's about to happen? Because as we're having that conversation, Sabine is still at the table trying to move that cup just a little bit with her limited ability to access the Force. And again, depending on how you feel as a Star Wars fan, you will find this new line of thought on the Force as sort of expanding our knowledge on beings being able to use the Force, or you will find it to be a contradiction to what we know, and you will push back against it. I think by and large, many of us are in the camp that, like I mentioned earlier, that we want to see if this is an expansion, if this is going to go somewhere, how this kind of shakes out. But there is something to be said for sort of like the line of thinking is like, well, does that mean if Han Solo practiced enough, he'd be able to use the Force too? So I'm kind of curious where this all goes. Again, I'm willing to go on the ride. Let's see where we end up. Though I suspect by the end of it, Sabine's going to have at least a limited control over the Force, a limited ability to access the Force. Control may not be the right word to use in reference to Jedi arts. But I also like that that Ahsoka is not looking for Sabine to be a Jedi. She wants Sabine to be Sabine, but she needs Sabine to be able to do more, to not be limited by sort of the ideas and the beliefs of the Mandalorians, right? Needs her to be a little bit more, be more fully herself. I think that's an interesting idea that Ahsoka has to sort of push Sabine into being more. So again, we'll see how she goes. I have a feeling it's all going to work out in the end, but I guess we'll have to wait and find out about that. Because what happens next is we get the holocom from Hera, informing them that they're not going to be able to join. the New Republic will not be coming. Sabine seems confused by all this, seems unhappy about it. Like, why can't you just pick up and go? Like, why can't you get on the Ghost and just we'll meet at Denab? Not really sort of, doesn't seem to, at least my inference is that she doesn't really seem to have, like, process that there's a lot of bureaucratic red tape now. Hera just can't jump in a ship and take off. She's a general in the New Republic. A lot more responsibility and protocols to be followed in that situation. And that's right before comms are disrupted because they've entered the Denab system and all outgoing transmissions are being jammed. But this gives us a chance to drop out of hyperspace early to see what Morgan Elsbeth has been up to. And it's that giant hyperspace ring that we saw last week, the Eye of Sion. And this leads us to some great Star Wars space combat. Gotta love it. It's a hallmark of the series, and I was so glad we got to see some cool Star Wars combat in this one. 2 squadrons of 3 fighters open fire on the T6, led by Marok and our favorite Shin Hati, and Shin rocking a little bit of a, we saw her rocking the traditional Jedi Padawan braid last week, and this time we see her don another piece of familiar prequel era headgear with the headset that is familiar to what Anakin wore in Episode 3, right? So another kind of nod to the past as this Padawan is learning from Baylan Skoll, who seems to be a little stuck in time maybe, and is honoring those old Jedi ways, even though the Jedi are long gone at this point. So again, I'm very intrigued by these characters, by Marok, by Shin Hati and Baylan Skoll, but we don't get a lot more information on them, a lot more background on them. So they're still very mysterious to us. We do get to hear Marok engage in a little bit more conversation this time around. And let's go ahead and we'll just put it out there now. A lot of speculation centering around Marok being Ezra Bridger himself. My personal opinion, I feel like that is crazy, and would be too far out of left field for me, for my liking. I suppose they could have it be like sort of like a brainwashed Ezra Bridger who was lost in space for a while after the end of the Battle of Lothal. But I think it makes more sense for Bridger to be in the same place as Thrawn. But I guess we'll have to see how it shakes out. Another big rumor is that because the voice of this character is being done by Sam Witwer, that perhaps we will get a recanonization of the character known as Starkiller from Force Unleashed. That would be intriguing. That character in the video game was the secret apprentice of Darth Vader. Will they go that far? Maybe, maybe not. But probably not. I mean, at least we know that if Vader was involved in getting him to the Inquisitors, possibly, again, something we speculated about. And this character did have a different name prior to being Starkiller. Was raised by, he had Jedi parents. Again, sort of going against what we think we know about the Jedi in a sense. But I want to wait and see. I still think that this character will have a more of a connection to Baylan Skoll than just being some kind of reformed Inquisitor. Reform is not quite the right word, but we'll see. I want to see how this shakes out. I don't like to play speculation because I like to have that moment where I like the big reveal moments. I don't want to have a bunch of theories running around in my head ahead of time. But that seems plausible. More plausible to me than the idea of Ezra. But it could be completely new. It could be something completely different. We'll have to wait and see. Let's all be patient. Let's not get crazy on the speculation. So anyway, we engage now in Star Wars space combat. Initially, it is the T6, Ahsoka piloting, Sabine in the tail gunner position, and Huang attempting to conduct a deep, thorough scan and analysis of the giant hyperspace ring that we see in the distance over the planet Denab. And the space combat is cool. We see Ahsoka and Sabine not quite on the same page in how to combat these ships that are attempting to destroy them. But eventually they're going to come together and start, we see the beginnings of a good team between Ahsoka and Sabine. So that's very, very neat. Now, we also get to go and have some fun as we get closer Huang's urging them to get closer so he can complete his thorough scan of the hyperspace ring. And the hyperspace ring, I think, is what a lot of us think it is. It's big and massive because they have to go to another galaxy. So they need a lot of propulsion power. And that's ultimately what it's revealed to be. But it's fun to see them have to get closer and closer, come into the range of the turbo lasers on the hyperspace ring, and ultimately see the ship get disabled, because this leads us to a really great sequence where Ahsoka steps outside and engages in lightsaber combat against spaceships, against starfighters specifically. And it's neat. It's a great sequence. It's fun to watch her running around doing the flips out in zero G. Zero G, is that right? Zero gravity, yeah. And then the maneuver that we see Sabine initiate to bring Ahsoka back to the ship, rotating the wings on the T6 to help propel Ahsoka back into the cabin when she's in danger of being blown away by Shin Hati. So that's an element of the T6 I do really enjoy. It was fun to see that ship do some things this time around, the way that the wings rotate around and changing its access points. I thought that was really, really neat. I enjoyed that aspect of it. I loved them being able to do different things with it in combat because of that. So I think the sequence is very dynamic. Steph Green directs the crap out of it. It's really, really well executed, really, really well done. And seeing more of the T6's capabilities. It doesn't seem to be an offensively powerful ship, but it has a lot of versatility, a lot of maneuverability, and I think that's very, very cool. So at one point, as I said, the ship's disabled. Sabine is trying to get the ship powered up again. We get that gray space combat, and then once the ship's powered up again, we descend down into the planet, down to Denab, and that's when we get our first visuals of like live action Purrgil. And I thought that was a really cool sequence. We've seen asteroid battles and all kinds of space battles in Star Wars where there's a lot of objects around with which to navigate and to engage in the combat. But moving between the Purrgil, the herd of Purrgil, I thought was super well done. Very, very cool. It doesn't look like anyone was blasting Purrgil, so either those Purrgil are pretty good at anticipating these things, or maybe it just was luck of the draw that it didn't seem that any Purrgil were getting hit by blaster fire. Not that I'm sure it would have done too much to the Purrgil, but very, very interesting. And I can't wait to see how that herd of Purrgil on Denab plays into Morgan Elsbeth's plan. For a while I sort of speculated if she has to capture a Purrgil to get to where they're going, if they're going to try and harness a Purrgil in that hyperspace ring. So I'm wondering if that's part of it, or if there's going to be a ship that goes, or if that ring is powerful enough on its own to traverse the space between galaxies. I still have a lot of questions. We know that it's a powerful engine, that it could possibly do the things that we need it to do to get to where Thrawn is. But again, I'm sort of, bad guys taking advantage of Purrgil seems to be on track with bad guys, capturing a poor innocent Purrgil, strapping him to a hyperspace ring to lead them on their migration patterns, pathway to Peridia. There's a lot to sort of wonder about what's coming up next. And God, it's a great sequence. The whole sequence is great. There's not a lot of dialogue to play from it, but it's fun. The back and forth between the characters is all great. Even the bad guys, Shin and Morgan sort of take jabs at each other. These characters, the bad guys, don't have a lot to do in this episode. It's very much more focused on our heroes. So I do like these little moments that we get with the bad guys sort of sparring with each other in a less aggressive way than we maybe have seen in the past from bad guys, but still very, very cool. So I do want to get to towards the very end of this, and it's interesting to note that for much of the space battle, Huang was offline, because after he got the just prior to the ship being disabled, he completed his scan, but then he went completely offline and has missed all the fun of seeing Purrgil, of seeing Ahsoka on the wing of the ship, all these great moments in the combat. So when he finally comes back online, and they well, let's just play the scene. I think it'd just be easier to play the scene. I'm going to play the scene, but I do want to I'm going to play the entire thing because I do also think it's interesting. I liked that there was a reaction from Sabine seeing the Purrgil for the first time since the Battle of the Thal and Ezra's disappearance. So I do like that's acknowledged, and I'm going to play that part to open up the sequence here. Here we go.
Are you all right?
Haven't seen those creatures since the day Ezra disappeared.
Anything interesting?
Indeed. The good news is the enemy vessel is still under construction and not yet complete. There are 6 hyperdrive engines in place, with the final one being set into position.
So it is a hyperspace ring.
Yes, but I have never seen one built on this scale before. A craft with these power levels and configuration would be capable of a hyperspace jump of astonishing speed and distance.
Ian, could a ring like that make a jump to a neighboring galaxy?
Theoretically, if one knew the coordinates and navigation, yes, I believe it could. The Jedi archives speak of intergalactic hyperspace lanes between galaxies, which used to follow the migration paths of star whales named Purgle.
Like the ones we just saw.
Really? When?
So there we go. A lot of, again, more information here. So you can extrapolate from what Huang just said, that at some point in the known Star Wars galaxy, intergalactic travel seemed to be something that maybe occurred a little bit more frequently with some regularity here, because everyone seems to be aware of it, right? So possibly the Star Wars galaxy is home to beings from other galaxies already, and we're just now beginning to explore it, to talk about it. And you can also postulate that potentially intergalactic travel, extragalactic travel, was more common a long time ago. So what changed? Why did that change? Why did that go away? Was it dangerous? Was it not safe? Were there threats in these other galaxies that people weren't prepared for? Well, there's a lot of information that we are left in the dark about. But again, speculation time. You know, we can get into it. There's a lot to get in there and wonder about. And again, I'm curious how many answers we'll get from the show, from the series, as it plays out, as we begin to ponder the idea of going extragalactic. And I guess I'm just intrigued. I can't wait to see where we go, what directions it all takes. I want to loop back to Sabine talking about seeing the Purrgil for the first time since Ezra left, and sort of like there's like sort of a small smile on her face as I think she realizes that they're on the right path. Seeing those creatures, I think, it sort of lights a little bit more hope in her that they're on the right track to finding Ezra Bridger. So very, very exciting stuff. And it's after this that we finally get to see Baylan Skoll. And let's just get him to close out the episode for us, okay?
The Jedi have taken refuge in the forest. Hunt them down.
All right, I'll leave it right there because it's just a really dramatic shot of Ray Stevens looking dramatic and imposing. But that's the end of our episode. It's a short episode by comparison to the first 2 parts of the series last week. But it has I think it has a great pacing. I like the breadth and depth of information that we're given in the episode. So I really liked it. I know some people are kind of complaining, like, oh, they're doing that thing where they do the short episodes again. Well, okay. You know, not every episode needs to be 55 minutes. I'm just saying. We got a lot of information. The story moved a little bit forward. I do wish maybe it was a smidge longer. But I'm very intrigued. It looks like next week will be an episode where we get to spend more time with Shin, Marok, and Baylan Skoll, and maybe even get a little bit more information on these characters who I am just completely enamored with, want to know more about, want to see their connection to Baylan's connection in particular to the Jedi of the past. And, what do we find out about Shin? What do we find out about Marok, if we find out anything at all next week? I'm very, very intrigued. I love this episode of the show. I think it set up everything very, very nicely moving forward. I give it 8.5 buckets. The space combat alone is worthwhile. And then, again, we're exploring, we're trying to expand our understanding of the Force as an audience, right? Like this show's challenging us to consider the Force in some slightly different ways for a character who is not traditionally considered an appropriate apprentice for learning to be a Jedi, right? Huang is sort of like that counterbalance to the old ways, while Ahsoka is offering a new theory, a new idea, a new way to train someone in the ways of the Force without necessarily having to follow the edicts, the coda of the Jedi that she has seen fail. Which is, again, this is an interesting track for her to be on, considering she sort of has embraced, I don't think it's the right word, but sort of supported Luke Skywalker's ideas of following the old traditions of the Jedi and bringing those back at his academy. So I want to keep seeing how this shakes out. I want to see how this plays out. I like that Ahsoka wants Sabine to be not a Jedi, but something different, much like she is herself. And let's keep exploring that. One thing I didn't get to mention earlier in the episode is back in that scene with Hera and the New Republic senators, is I really like this sort of idea. You know, it's been interesting, right? We're 3 episodes in, no Thrawn yet. I like that Thrawn is just sort of like this looming menace, even though we haven't seen him. He's like the shark from Jaws right now, you know, where just the idea of Thrawn gets people really nervous and uncomfortable. You know, it's like the idea is like you don't have to see the shark to know that he's in the water, right? There's enough out there for you to be like, maybe I think twice about putting my foot in that water and going out too deep, you know? So I like the Thrawn is like very threatening and menacing without even having been seen yet. Just the idea of his return causes Mon Mothma to sort of pause and reconsider, because again, she's the character who knows the threat he poses. These other senators, they're a bunch of doofuses. They don't count. But for the characters in the know, yeah, Thrawn's a big deal. And they know the threat he poses to the New Republic. So even though we haven't seen him through 3 episodes, the threat of Thrawn is very, very real and very tangential. We'll just say it was real. My words aren't working today, folks. I'm sorry about that. So I love the looming threat of Thrawn. It provides a lot of menace for a character who hasn't even been seen in live action just yet. So great stuff. Love the episode. Again, 8.5 buckets. The series is gold so far. I'm really having a good time with it. It's been a lot of fun. And I can't wait to see the way the show keeps challenging us, pushing us to reconsider the way we look at Force users and the ability to use the Force. Let's see where that goes. Let's see if they can deliver in a fashion that makes a lot of sense and changes our ideas of Force users. We'll see if that landing works. Otherwise, I think I got all my notes, right? We did it all. The only other thing I don't think I mentioned is that the starfighters that Shin Hati and Maruk are flying, they have a familiarity visually to the craft we saw General Grievous flying in Episode 3, but they're not directly linked, I don't think. They just sort of have a similar visual flair. Again, sort of reminding us that maybe Baylan Skoll's holding on to the past a little bit too tightly. If this is like a prequel era, Clone Wars era starfighters that he's having his apprentices flying in. So waiting to see how that shakes out more, or if it's just more of a coincidence. But knowing Dave Filoni, I don't think he has a lot of coincidence in his Rolodex. So I think it's for a reason. I think it's for a reveal later on. You know, as we get to know more of Baylan Skoll and who he is and what his connection to the Jedi is and his history with them. So I can't wait to see that. Otherwise, I think we're done here. I think we can wrap up the show. This is the Mandovision Podcast. My name is Tom, Nargai Tom. Thank you for being here. Thank you for always supporting the show. Buckethead Nation is the best nation on the planet, in the galaxy, and in all the other galaxies as well, since we're going to go extra galactic soon. Make sure you're following us on social media. I truly appreciate the follows, the likes, and tagging me on your posts. I love it, love it, love it. Thank you for doing that. Find us at Mando_Vision on Twitter and Instagram. I guess it's X now instead of Twitter. I don't know. Email the show, mandovisiontom@gmail.com. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow, and share this podcast with all the Mandalorians in your covert. If your podcasting platform offers reviews, please write us some reviews. Give us 5 stars. They help small independent shows like us stand out, not get lost in the extra galactic shuffle that exists out there. So we truly appreciate you taking the time to do that. And again, it's a great way to support our podcast without having to do a whole heck of a lot. You don't even have to write the review. Just thumb on the 5-star. Boom. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Thank you, everybody. Again, continue to be excellent Star Wars fans. Be supportive. Be kind. This series has a lot of people who don't know the history of Ahsoka. Don't chastise them. Don't rub their face in it that they didn't watch Clone Wars or Rebels. Help them out. Embrace them. Maybe not during the show. That'd be annoying. But offer your insights to the characters, to the history when you can. Be supportive, be welcoming, be great Star Wars fans. That's what we need out here. This podcast does not tolerate the toxicity of the Star Wars fandom. So just keep being great Star Wars fans. You already are. And be welcoming to the new ones. We need to grow the fan base. Can't get big enough. All right? I think with that being said, we'll be back next week for episode 4 of Ahsoka. But in the meantime, remember, this podcast can only end one way. This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way. This is the way.
Hey, Mom! Mom! Is it true Aunt Sabine is gonna be a Jedi?
Now, where did you hear that?
Chopper told me. I want to be a Jedi.
Yeah, I know you do, Jason.